Okay, let's start. Thank you very much, Mahima, Naresh, and Uku for agreeing to do the session today. This is a great privilege for us, given that we've been talking about privacy technology since March this year, and it's really nice to kind of open up the dialogue internationally with Plausible and the work that Uku is doing. Privacy Mode is a community that we have created at HasGeek to discuss technologies that are being built around privacy, compliance, and data governance. There have been a whole bunch of people who've been associated with the various forums that we've incubated, including some of the people who are present in today's chat, such as Suchna, Samir, and a bunch of you who have also joined via YouTube. I'm not going to take much time. We'll jump straight into this conversation today, and I'll let Mahima and Naresh introduce themselves. Who they will be moderating the session today, and then over to Mahima to take over the proceedings. Mahima, Naresh, please introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I am Mahima. I am a senior consultant and a data scientist at the Mindful AI Lab. We do AI ethics audits and offer advisory services in responsible AI. My work focuses on the ethical and technical aspects of data privacy and privacy audits. Naresh?
Thank you, Mahima. Hi, everyone. I am Naresh Bharadwaj. I am a product manager at Zendrive. Zendrive is a platform to analyze road safety risk through data collected using just a smartphone. Given our enterprise deployments and their sensitivity to regulations, we aim to be privacy preserving in our approach to data collection and computing insights. I'm looking forward to having an informative chat regarding privacy with both you, Uku, and Mahima.
That's great. Uku, if you want to take over and give a small introduction about yourself and Plausible.
Yeah, so my name is Uku. I'm a developer from Estonia. For the past almost 2 years now, I've been working on Plausible Analytics, which is an open source web analytics platform built as an alternative for Google Analytics, if you're familiar with that. Initially, it was a side project, but over time it developed into my full-time pursuit now. So we have an open source product that you can self-host, and we also offer a hosted version of the same product. So my journey in this sort of started when, I guess it was 2016 when I became more and more aware of the privacy issues with large tech companies, and I started. All my friends switched from Google to DuckDuckGo and from Chrome to Firefox, and there was this whole thing about de-googling your life, and I mean I think it's still going strong. People have grown suspicious of large companies and how they handle our data and how their business model tends to incentivize large-scale personal data collection. So trying to look for alternatives and build alternatives. I'm sort of in that world. I really enjoy it. So should I go into the demo of Plausible?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. So hopefully this will be can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So whether you're familiar with Google Analytics or not, this is an alternative to that, but it's also built as a very simple tool for people to get started in web analytics in case in case they're not familiar with it. The dashboard is extremely simple, as you can see, whereas in Google Analytics we have dozens and dozens of different reports. In Plausible, this is the live demo, so this is the analytics running on our website at the moment, and it's completely live. So we have 35 visitors on the website at the moment, which is very high for us. So there's still a spike from our marketing push yesterday. We launched our self-hosted stable version 1 yesterday. So the dashboard is, it's meant to give you just quick insights into what's going on the website. There's a graph with visitors. The graph can be, so currently it's just for today, but there are many timeframes available that we can analyze. We can look at October so far, or last year, whatever. I usually I check analytics every day, so I stay in the today view most of the time. We get unique visitor counting without using cookies. So this is maybe something interesting to discuss later.
Oh, yeah.
We get total page views, bounce rate, visit duration. These are, if you've used Google Analytics or similar tools, these are pretty standard terms. If not, you can check our documentation as to what they mean. We detect the traffic source using the HTTP refer header, or if you're more into your sort of attribution analysis, you can also add UTM tags to your links and get more control over how your traffic sources are being recorded. Then we have the top pages report, which is just showing the content that is popular right now. As you can see, most people on our site, well, today they're checking this blog post because we just launched it, but normally our landing page and our live demo would be the most popular pages. So we have the country report. We get visitors from all over the world, and for those who are interested in sort of what devices the customers are on, it's helpful for, like, if you want to optimize for mobile or desktop, it gives you these kinds of insights to be able to improve your website, basically. And we have this optional module. So when you set up Plausible in the beginning, we don't, you need to manually sort of integrate this, but you can track either custom events or page visits and define them as your goals and track how many people are converting. So we have 30 trial signups today, which is quite high for us. Now, what sets us apart from many other simple sort of analytics tools or privacy preserving tools is the fact that there are these kinds of drill downs here where you can, you can click on to say Reddit, and we filter all the traffic to people who came from Reddit. So this enables us to see what traffic sources are driving the highest quality of traffic, and it allows us to see what pages they are the people are landing on, coming from Reddit, for example, or you can do the reverse. You can look at where are people coming from landing on this versus Matomo page that we have defined. So the idea is for the dashboard to be very simple on the surface of it, but then provide you a lot of depth if you want to go into the data and see how your marketing campaigns are doing, or just see who's visiting your website, basically. Integrating with Plausible is extremely simple. You have to include a JavaScript script tag on your website. One of the main problems I had with Google Analytics is that when you install it, you're adding about 42 kilobytes of JavaScript onto your website, and it doesn't sound like a lot, but all these trackers if you add multiple, they tend to add up and really bloat the website. So I specifically designed Plausible to have a very small JavaScript footprint. So it's less than 1 kilobyte of JavaScript that you include on your website. It's one script tag, as long as you use a CMS or you're in control of the HTML on your website, you can install Plausible easily. And we're working towards having a server-side integration as well, where we can basically do just log analysis without needing to integrate on the JavaScript level. That can't make any promises, but hopefully that will be available next year.
That's great.
Yeah. So because if you don't want to install JavaScript on your website, it's I think it's if you can get the data you need from just server logs, why not, right? Why install the JavaScript tag and add to the number of requests and data that gets loaded on websites. So yeah, we're trying to enable all kinds of privacy respecting practices that and also sort of improving just the user experience and making websites load fast, I think is quite important as well. Yeah, that's pretty much the demo.
Okay, yeah, I think that was great. So would you like to talk about the self-hosted version of Plausible?
Yeah, sure. So Plausible has been open source from the start, but because it would have been sort of, I felt like it would have been a strain on the development speed. I didn't make an official support for self-hosted in the beginning. But actually just yesterday we launched version 1, the stable version of self-hosted Plausible, which means as long as you have a server and as long as you have Docker, you can install it on your own machine.
That's great.
The reason to do it is, well, you get more control over your data. If you're an analyst, you can export raw data straight from the database. You can do your own analysis on it. I think from a regulatory perspective, it's better. Well, maybe not even regulatory, but like a philosophical. There are some companies at least, and I'm part of them, that if I don't have to share some piece of data with a third party, if I can just keep it in my own database, then that's great. So we want to enable that. The project is an open source project first, and we do sell a hosted version for people who want more convenience, and that's funding the open source project. But the way I think about it is it's an open source project first. And now that we've launched the self-hosted version, we're also starting to get more community contributions and more sort of, I'm glad to see this becoming more of a community project rather than just sort of my project.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the great things about open source projects, just like the kind of community support you get. So just to like set some context, when we talk about Google Analytics, I think we see so many issues with them. Like there are issues with privacy, and then we talk about users having no actual control over their data. Google Analytics are closed source, so we don't know how the data is being used. And there is also no explicit mechanism for informing visitors that they are being tracked. So those being some of the main issues that arise when people use Google Analytics, led us to like sort of have this conversation about privacy and privacy preserving alternatives to them, which brings us to Plausible. So if I could start, I think the first question I would like to ask Uku is, how audit friendly do you think Plausible is? So for instance, if I say I want to do a privacy audit of my website and I want to show my stakeholders an audit report about what kind of data Plausible collects, how it's handled, who gets to see it, who it's shared with. So how does Plausible enable me to do that?
The fact that we're open source lends itself to a lot of audit. The whole code is ready to be audited. There is the question of there is still a little bit of trust, right? People who use us as a third-party hosted service, they have to trust that we're running the same code in production as the one that's being published on GitHub. They also have to trust that we have server access logs turned off, for example, which we do have, because that would contain their customers' IP addresses, which is considered personal data. So at the moment, there is some trust involved. what I'm working towards is to have a independent third-party audit done for, which is actually, I would be very interested to hear suggestions on who is providing these kinds of audit services, because I would love to have someone come in, look at the way we're hosting the project and put a stamp of approval, say, you know, they're actually following all the privacy presuming practices, like, for example, turning off logs and making sure that the access to, you know, our servers is properly safeguarded, and that the data is encrypted at rest, and all that stuff that is sort of feels obvious to me, but it needs to be proved. So
yeah, I mean, it's funny that you asked that, because that is something the Mindful AI Lab does. But yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think that's great. How you? I think, yeah, the fact that it is open source automatically lends that answers that question to some extent. But yeah, there is some implicit element of trust that is when you do opt to use a service like that. So like, does Plausible install a tracker on a browser? If it does, are you whitelisted? Are you blacklisted? What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so it is JavaScript based analytics, which means it's very subject to blocking, and we are on I know at least one of the lists that uBlock Origin uses. We're on it, and Pi-hole, one of the default lists, we're on that as well. So this is just, you know, there's it's something we talk a lot about with Marco, my co-founder. I know AdBlock or AdBlock Plus has this concept of acceptable ads. So there's been within Plausible users, and not only us, but many privacy focused sort of analytics tools have popped up recently, and the common sentiment that I hear is that we should lobby AdBlock and uBlock Origin to ignore some types of trackers, provided that they can prove their claims about how, you know, how they deal with privacy practices, whether it's open source or not, whatever their criteria may be. There's been, you know, calls for lobbying sort of an acceptable web analytics movement, which would allow tools like independent tools like these to exist and to track, because yeah, blocking is a huge concern. You know, it's one of the main issues that people have with Google is it's getting blocked everywhere. You know, everyone.
Yeah.
So many people are using Firefox, Brave, ad blockers, tracker blockers, all that kind of stuff. Now Safari even is doing some blocking.
Like, I think this last week they came out with a new update, and every time I open Safari, I see a tab that says that, okay, I mean, today it was 88 trackers. 88 trackers were banned, like blocked by Safari this week. So yeah.
Yeah, and there's sort of this conflict there where the problem from like personally for me would be, I know that off websites that have a tracker installed. Now I don't know exactly what this I don't remember what the source of this data point is, but 84% were using Google Analytics. So the sort of knee-jerk reaction is to say, well, all tracking is bad, it's terrible, we don't want any tracking because, you know, Google is probably using that data to target me with advertisements later. But on a more principled level, you know, if I visit the website, I think the website owner has right to know that I was there, you know, or at least like see a number go up in their hit counter, right? And they can get all that data from their server logs. There's no hiding that.
Right.
One of the issues with server logs is that they're full of bot traffic, and it's just horrible. It's more than half of traffic to any website is bots. So this is sort of a tension between like, well, all tracking is bad. There's that camp, then there's the camp of, you know, usually website owners who are saying, but we want people to be tracked, and then now there's sort of us who say, well, maybe certain types of analytics should be sort of acceptable or not blocked by default by the browsers and extensions. So that's sort of where we stand. We're trying to popularize the idea of like acceptable tracking.
Level of tracking, yeah.
Yeah, like what is the acceptable level of tracking, and let's have a public conversation about, you know, what does the website owner have sort of the right to know without requiring consent from
without being intrusive. Yeah.
Exactly. So.
So
it's a bit of a mess right now. It's my answer.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a question coming in from Suchana. So she says she would love to ask you about the multi-stakeholder nature of this question, like who gets to decide what trackers are good versus which trackers are bad. Should it be just DuckDuckGo or Brave deciding this, or do you see it as a more participatory exercise involving tools like Plausible and some other standard setting bodies?
I'm very pro democracy on this front. I think the more people are involved in talking about this and figuring this out, the better. I hope regulatory bodies get involved, because I think that's well, they're sort of needed. I think, and their opinion is I think leading on this front, and I hope that they sort of I think projects like DuckDuckGo, Brave, Firefox, they can sort of lead the way, and they can get the early adopters and popularize some of these ideas about privacy. But I do think that it needs to be brought into public discussion with as many participants as necessary. We don't. We're happy to change our implementation if there's a decision or just we feel a strong sentiment from our customers or the visitors or from the community in general. We're happy to change the implementation.
Okay, so do you feel that levels of tracking can be decided by giving users even more, quote unquote choice, where they aren't really giving informed consent? Like cookie pop-ups, or just to give an example.
Yeah. I'm not a big believer in well, I don't think that the consent pop-ups we're seeing. I mean, I have a bunch of extensions now to block the pop-ups because they're so annoying, and this is one of those issues. And it's like agreeing to terms of service. It's no one reads them. It's never informed consent, I don't think. So it's I'm much stronger on regulating the data processors, regulating the practices, what is acceptable, what isn't, on a global sort of standard for everyone, rather than having every individual choose what level of tracking is acceptable to them. I mean, that can be part of that, of course. If you want some like extra tracking from your customers, you ask for that, but I think there should be like some baseline of how tracking should like how tracking should be done, how it shouldn't be done, without consent. And something I've talked long about is I think consent management should be built into browsers rather than each website themselves. Like, if you just set it on a browser level, and every website has to respect that, and if the website doesn't respect it, it's illegal. I think that's the easiest way to sort of solve the consent pop-up issue we have right now.
Okay, Naresh, would you like to add to that?
Right. So I always felt that the question of pop-ups and blockers it's a bit of an arms race. We always find black hats discovering ways to get past some of these blockers on browsers. I think with what I've observed is that with Safari, they've taken a more curated approach where they've done the whitelisting and therefore a user can expect to be tracked somewhat, but Apple is then the arbiter. Whereas in case of browsers like Brave, they can be a little more extreme, where they block everything altogether, which may, in some cases, be at the detriment of a user, where some valid use case like Uku's Plausible tracking may also get blocked. So,
I mean, so, sorry to interject, but we've heard from many people who also completely disagree with allowing something like Plausible to be, installed without consent, basically. So there are people out there who are vehemently against any and all tracking, and we bump into them all the time. and it creates a conflict for sure. I'm not of the Brave. I'm more of the Safari mindset than the Brave mindset myself. But obviously I'm biased. So sorry.
Right.
Continue.
So I think I would like to move on to the next question we had for you, which is what are the adoption barriers compared to incumbents like Google Analytics? For instance, people, if someone is moving from Google Analytics to Plausible, they might not want to lose their Google Analytics history while they do that. And the industry does not have a set format for that data export yet. So what do you have to say to that?
Yeah, the main barriers, I mean, there are two, price and data history. So let me talk about the data history first. It's sort of a matter of building it. I'm always in favor of more freedom of choice, more portability. So if I think people should be able to switch providers as easily, super easily, basically. So in that case, it's useful to the consumer if it's possible to basically migrate their data from one provider to another very quickly and very easily. So there's no industry standard format for how you would export analytics data. We have some suggestions on to try to build something like an industry standard. So even if we would build, basically the idea is to build a bunch of extractors from different tools like Matomo, Google Analytics. There's a stat counter. There's a bunch of other independent ones as well, and to try to take data from them and then force them all into this one format, and then also build sort of ingesters into these different tools, so you could sort of import export from any tool. Now that would be a huge problem. Of course, it would be much easier if we all agreed, here's how we export data, here's how we import data, and have one format for it. I don't know if there are legal precedents for saying if you want to be in a tool of that category, you have to support this sort of data export.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Could be wrong. Yeah.
And that you could argue that's sort of anti-competitive, because you're restricting small startups because they have to comply to this regulation, and it's taking them longer to build their initial MVP or whatever. So I think it's maybe not necessarily that regulation is the answer. Maybe it's something that we just get the community to build as many adapters between the different tools as possible, and then just maintain them ourselves. The other thing is barrier to adoption is price. Google offers Google Analytics for free. So there's two reasons. One, I haven't found good official documentation for whether Google Analytics uses its analytics data for its advertising tools. So I haven't found an unequivocal yes or no on this. So I assume that they're using that data. I assume that it's part of their business model is to give away analytics for free so that they can basically see what websites you're visiting, so that they can better target you with advertisements.
Yeah.
it would be silly not to from their business perspective. But that's the business model, is to give away some product for free so that you can make money in a different place using the data you collect from this free tool. So that's very difficult right now. We ask, we don't have any free offering because we have a free trial, but if you want to use this tool, you have to pay for the SaaS hosted version. And the reason is because we have no use for your data. It's a pure cost for us. And so it's not an asset. We don't look at data as like, yes, we want all that data. So
I don't think that's the reason a lot of people would argue against.
yeah, so currently we find people who are basically willing to pay for a tool that is where a similar alternative is available for free. That makes it very difficult. That's a huge barrier for adoption. So we're hoping to reach economies of scale where having a free offering makes sense. At the moment, we're not there, but given that the mission is to make privacy first analytics as an open source analytics as accessible as possible to everyone, that seems like a natural path, going forward.
Right.
To remove the price barrier, basically, for at least smaller sites.
Okay, thank you for that. So, which actually sort of connects in nicely with my next question, which is, given that Plausible is open source, what is, like, if you could elaborate on the business model sustainability it has or you have for the long term?
Yeah, it's to give away so we don't we hold no intellectual property on the code, right? All of it is at MIT open source. There's no you can take it and do whatever you want. You can start a competing business with it if you want to. So our business model is not to create some proprietary thing and then to sell that. Our business model is we want to be building open source software, and the way we're going to fund that is by, luckily, this product is one that we can host and sell subscriptions to for people who don't want to install it on a server themselves. There are many examples. GitLab is probably the biggest one, where they offer a hosted service, and but the code is open source. You can host it yourself if you want to. Most people choose to pay for the hosted service because it's just simpler. It's you don't need to manage a server. You don't need to worry about upgrades.
Not too much,
stuff like that. Making sure your database is up to date with security. There's managing software is there are people who do it as a hobby, but usually it's easier to just pay someone else to manage the server for you.
Just to outsource it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we in terms of revenue, we're a hosting company essentially. I mean, we host the code, and the revenues coming from hosting it are going straight into development of the open source product. There are many sustainable companies doing a similar job. So I think the business model is sound, and that's the idea.
Okay,
we have no intentions of ever using the data or in any way to have revenue. So this is something I've been maybe I can get some help on this, but something I've been looking into is like writing into our terms of service that the data. I don't know if there is such a legal concept as data ownership. But like I would like the data to be owned by the customer so that
the user,
we wouldn't legally be able to sell it. Like it would be against our own terms of service if we used your data to monetize it in any way.
Okay.
So that's out of the question.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Naresh, if you would like to take over.
Right. So Uku, as I was preparing for this discussion, I placed myself in the shoes of an average customer, and I was imagining what kind of questions I may have. So one of the first thoughts that occurred to me was, do we see any different attitudes towards privacy from users belonging to different regions? For instance, do you feel that users in the EU are more sensitive towards privacy issues than say users in the US or other regions?
That's a really, really good question. So we have noticed that we can engage people from the EU seem to be, I was surprised by this. I thought the audience was going to be more US centric, but actually it's turned out to be more EU centric. I mean, it is a European company. Both of us are European, the co-founders, but for some reason I thought it would resonate more in the States, but actually it resonates more in Germany is one of our top countries where people are really interested in Plausible. UK is big and India is big. So we're getting quite a lot of interest from Germany, UK, India, and the US as well, but actually less than I expected. So.
And that offers me a segue into my next question. We've seen that regulation is catching up with users and their expectation of privacy. So in that sense, what do you see now? It's been almost 2 years since the advent of GDPR. What do you think is its future? Has it increased the burden of regulation on startups, or has it helped larger companies? Do you see this to be the longer term solution?
To me, I think GDPR is okay. It worked best for, I get much less spam than I used to. I think in terms of regulating email communications, it was great. And I saw companies immediately change their practices with double opt-ins and so forth. In terms of personal data, I think the enforcement has been so lax that we're not really seeing that many websites who are following it, legally. They might have a consent pop-up, but actually they have, Google Analytics running from the second you load the page. Right? We see that everywhere, and the regulation tends to be quite obscure, and it would be a burden on small companies, I think, if it was actually enforced, but since it doesn't tend to be, I worked in small companies since GDPR came out, and people generally don't really care, which is just something I've seen, is that if you have a few thousand visitors per month, then they're not afraid of any sort of enforcement, and therefore they don't really tend to follow the law. What is the future? To me, GDPR doesn't go into the heart of what I consider to be the biggest issue with the privacy, which is the whole personal, targeted advertising machine that has been built up by the likes of Facebook, Google. GDPR puts a lot of by sort of the text of it, it puts a lot of the burden on the website owners rather than the providers of these services. I think an average user of Google Analytics might not even be aware of all the issues that Google is sort of involved in. So I think I would put a lot more burden on those data processors like Plausible, like Google, like Facebook, on what they're allowed to do, rather than on what the website owners should do with the consent management. So that's my opinion on it in terms of where the future should be. And the place to start would be, I think, browsers. I think would be to regulate how browsers work, because they're only they're like the gateway to all web, right? So and more, something like 70-80% of people use Chrome. So if you just regulate Chrome, we would have a huge impact on privacy everywhere. If you just take the practices that Safari is doing now, Firefox is doing, and add them to Chrome, overnight, it would be a huge difference, right?
Right. So we have a question coming in from the audience. So Rohit Joshi is asking, how does Plausible count unique users without using cookies?
Yeah, it's a good question. We have a method which is not as accurate, so just want to be honest about that. It's very similar to how you would do it if you had log analysis tools. So we use the number of unique IP addresses, IP address combined with user agent, because oftentimes you have network address translation, and so multiple users potentially appear under the same IP address. We don't want to store the IP address, so this was a big deal. Was to work on that part. We don't want to store, because again GDPR and my own principles sort of guide us to a place where we don't want to store IP addresses, because you could identify the natural person who generated the page view. So in order to do that, we take the IP address, the user agent, the website domain, and a daily rotating salt, and we run it all through a hash function. So this is a way to, and basically, since the salt changes on a daily basis, if we didn't rotate the salt, it would still be possible to brute force your way back into and figure out what IP addresses were accessing what website when. But due to the addition of the rotating salt, since we delete the salt after 24 hours, at that point, those page views are essentially anonymous, because it would be impossible to recover the actual IP address that generated that page view. So that's the method. It means that when you go on a website that uses Plausible today, and then you go again tomorrow, you would be counted twice. So it's not as good as, so it means that, you know, we only see sort of uniques per day, but on a longer time frame, it doesn't work now. I've thought about making it configurable, but then, you know, it's maybe for self-hosters, but maybe not for the cloud version. I really don't want to get slapped with some sort of GDPR. You know, we want to be very, very sort of safe in the sense that, like, we're not storing personal data, because IP addresses are personal data, and we don't want to have any possibility of recovering them from the database.
Right. Thank you. So Naresh, if you want to take over.
Right. So the next set of questions, Uku, are related to some of the trade-offs that you know, I as a product manager and many other product managers make when they're considering privacy challenges for their applications. The first one that I think is an obvious trade-off is very often, you know, we may want to offer personalized experiences to our users, maybe a product recommendation or an autofill. Is there some sort of a path to create such experiences without sacrificing privacy? Does Plausible have something in its roadmap to address this this need for website owners?
I don't have any good ideas on how we might support people doing that. Generally speaking, I think personalized experience they're okay, as long as it's clear that that's what the app is doing. I think one of the issues in a wider context is that when I Google search something and you Google search something, we're going to see different results. And that is useful to some degree, but it's also gives incredible power to the search engine to manipulate what people think. And the same goes for Facebook timelines and Twitter feeds. And, so I think personalization can go way too far, and it has to some degrees. But of course, if you're you know, shopping for a product and you see recommendations that are personalized to you, and they're sort of shown and recommended for you, and it's clear that this is personalized, then I think that's fine. how we can help people to do that, I don't know. We're going to have an API soon, so maybe people could somehow tap into ways in which their website is being used, and based on that, somehow personalize things. But it wouldn't be, on principle, we won't offer like an endpoint for like, where did this user go yesterday, or what did this user do? We're not tracking individuals, and we're never going to expose that sort of data. So not very helpful in that sense on an individual basis.
Right. Yeah, I think in a certain sense they are in conflict, and
yeah,
I think therefore the goal is to really offer the best possible experience by understanding what the overall numbers look like, not in a targeted sense.
And I think this is something that like DuckDuckGo is showing, is that we can actually, for example, you can do great advertising without necessarily personalizing it by just advertising on keywords. I don't think there's actually that much value in much of the personalization that happens on these platforms. I think it's there's a lot of it that's sort of unnecessary, and we could just use contextual cues to show things to people based on, in search based on keywords, and in Facebook based on the page you're on. Basically, you could show advertisements based on the page, for example. But I think we've gone overboard with personalization. That's what you see in many privacy respect, like DuckDuckGo, like all these tools. What you see is depersonalizing it and making it more like, what you see is what you get. What you see, I see. And then DuckDuckGo gives you choices on what, if you want to personalize, you have to opt in. And I think that's the better model to use, is to show the same thing to everyone by default, and then do personalizations as an opt-in.
Okay, great. We have another comment coming in from the audience. So Karthik says, in addition to regulation regarding personal data, India has seen proposals that aim to regulate non-personal data as well. So the framework allows for mandatory data sharing and government access to raw data and even insight. So how do you see businesses getting affected by such a move?
So I just picked up the phrase mandatory data sharing and government access to raw data, and that seems like, I mean, not to get political, but that's just insane to me. Like,
yeah,
that's horrible. I mean, I would campaign against that, obviously, because I don't think the government should have access to the raw data, of well, unless it's a matter of life and death, but that's not very common, I don't think. So it seems like NSA on steroids to me. I mean, yeah, regulation creates a bunch of trade-offs, but here the trade-off is just a non-starter for me. Like the idea that the government has access to raw data from companies, personal or impersonal.
Yeah.
I'm very concerned, and this is sort of brings, I guess, into a topic I'm really interested in, and creates a lot of trade-offs and conflicts, as well as like centralization and decentralization. Like in this context, it seems like we're just centralizing a bunch of data and then giving one organization, the government, access to everything, and
yeah,
the power that comes with is very concerning. Yeah. So I think generally speaking, like it's sort of a lot of privacy and open source people are into decentralization, and they're looking to one of the problems that many people have with Google and Facebook is not even necessarily their practices, but they might say that this is a natural consequence of centralization and monopolization of the marketplace. I think that's a very good argument, and the tendency towards decentralization in open source communities, I think, is very healthy. At the same time, it's I think, you know, centralized services, they become more powerful. The more, especially with data, the more you have, the more powerful that organization becomes.
Yeah.
The more you can control. And so, yeah, people are like very suspicious of power and suspicious of authority, and this sort of the sort of power that centralized services carry with them. So I think we should be extremely careful about things like this, like mandatory data sharing with the government. I think that's very concerning to me, and I think centralized services can be healthy if the power is like necessary and cannot be provided in any other way of the centralized body, like Google. I don't think you can build now. Some people might like have some interesting proposals there, but I'd like to see how you can build a search engine that does not centralize like the index of the web, right? It needs to be centralized basically for it to work. So the power is useful there, but I think, you know, centralized services need to be under. We should be looking suspiciously at them and always challenge their authority.
Okay, great. Just before we pop towards the next question Naresh asked, there's another comment coming in from the audience. So Rohit Joshi is also asking, by using Plausible, do the users get to keep 100% ownership of their website data?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Okay.
So 100% ownership is, you know, that's the idea, that's the intention. What exactly that means, we haven't defined it necessarily, but the way we define it is we don't use data for monetization in any way. Meaning the data is the only use of the data is to provide analytics for you as the website owner, nothing else. If we can write that into our terms of service, that'd be great. If we can have a different interesting definitions of what data ownership means, I'd love to explore that and move in that direction as much as possible.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. So there's another question coming in. You spoke about the challenges of building an interoperable open standard for data portability across web analytics vendors. So if you could elaborate a little on that.
Yeah, the challenge is, I mean, the challenge is basically that you can have 10 different solutions to the same problem, and in many cases, you know, web analytics tools tend to converge, and Google Analytics sets the standard of what the data should look like. But it's there's just many details in how you can do things differently. So what this might be a silly example, but like do you consider some new country a country? Like what data set are you using? Are you using a data set where like Kosovo is a country or not? Like so you might have just different values in the different, you know, fields that or different options. Basically, you might use a different country code. You might use the 2-letter ISO code instead of the 3. You could use, I think where we see most difference is determining the device type. So for Plausible, we actually use the width of the screen measured by JavaScript. So like the actual browser window, how wide it is, because that's the closest to what you would need as the website owner, which is to decide whether your layout needs to be mobile or desktop. But some do it based on the user agent, and others do it based on the screen width using different breakpoints. So in that case, the data is completely incompatible because one is looking at, you know, a bigger breakpoint than the other. One might have 5 different screen sizes or device types, the other might have 4. So there's just
so I would like to go back to your reply from a couple of questions back where you spoke about centralization, decentralization.
Yeah.
I know we are looking to have regulation step in and solve the problem, but do you feel that technology also may offer an answer? For example, we are now seeing a proposed Web3 architecture with blockchain technologies, Ethereum coming up. Do you think, while they're not ready for, say, scale, do you think over the next 5-10 years, we're going to see a shift towards decentralized technology, even say within the browser?
No. I mean, it's sort of trying to tell the future is you're always taking shots in the dark. But what I've seen in the past is that there's this healthy tendency towards decentralization. People are working on these problems. And yeah, it kind of works with currency, sort of, right? I mean, I still can't go to the store and buy an Apple with Bitcoin in most stores where I'm at. So I just think that the centralization as a concept carries with it so much power that I don't think it's just, I'm not optimistic about dismantling, these large centralized organizations that form, in the same way that I'm not optimistic about dismantling the United States or the European Union. Like, the organizations tend to grow in complexity and centralize in bigger and bigger organizations, and I think that's what's sort of happening. So if anything, I have more faith in the opposite direction, that, I mean, hopefully people will realize that we have these centralized services, and hopefully we can get to a place where they can be brought under public democratic control rather than controlled by private entities. So that's sort of the optimistic future I'm looking at. I'm not against decentralization. It's great. I'm all for it. But it's just, I think it's, by going in that direction, you're kind of stripping yourself of a lot of power that centralization gives these organizations. So
like accountability being a major factor when you say you're being optimistic.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I think that was great. So Uku, again, thank you so much for joining us. And Zainab, if you have any closing remarks.
Sure, thanks a lot, Mahima. Just a second. Sorry about the disturbance. Thanks a lot, Naresh, Mahima, and Uku, for having this conversation. I'm sure that we will have a whole bunch of follow-up questions, and I think as there is an environment of regulation that's building up in India around privacy, whether it's personal data or non-personal data, I'm sure, Uku, that we will rope you in for future conversations and more sort of global dialogue in terms of how do we think about these privacy preserving technologies. So thank you so much for doing this. Yes, if the audience will have any questions, please do visit hasbi.com/privacy mode, where you can post these questions and we'll take them to Mahima, Naresh, and to Uku for further responses. Coming up next month is a discussion on data brokers and the framework that's been used in the US and how it applies in India. You'll hear an announcement soon. And for those of you who are also interested, we are conducting a study on understanding the status of privacy and technology in India. Again, an announcement is coming up soon this week, so that you can refer to it on hasbi.com/privacy mode. Having said that, I hope all of you have a wonderful evening and a good day. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you everyone,
Thank you.
and thank you to everyone who joined. Thank you.
Thank you.